Once again, welcome to our AJA Lunchtime Live. I'm Kimberly Carroll. I'm the AJA Director, and our topic today is the bill to phase out animal experimentation with Kaitlyn Mitchell. And I want to welcome all you excellent beings for being here with us live. It really means a lot when you are here with us and you can participate. But I also want to, acknowledge the folks that are watching the replay, because it also takes sort of a lot of deliberateness to come back and watch it. So we're really happy to have you all here with us. There is an exciting new Canadian bill in the House of Commons, folks. It's called Bill S5. And it has the potential to phase out the most painful forms of animal testing and put Canada on track to become a leader in animal-free testing methods. And we need your help to get it amended and passed. So to lead us in that charge, we have with us today our staff lawyer from Animal Justice, Kaitlyn Mitchell. Let me just give you a little bit of background while we're bringing up Kaitlyn. Kaitlyn is a legal goddess at Animal Justice. She works to stop the spread of ag-gag laws in Canada, improve legal protections for animals, and defend the rights of animal advocates. Prior to joining Animal Justice, Kaitlyn worked for over a decade as a public interest environmental lawyer, specifically with eco-justice. She's appeared before numerous courts across the country, including the Supreme Court of Canada. And Kaitlyn graduated from Dalhousie Law School in 2007. Shout out to Dalhousie, that's where our Kirsten's at right now, just started law school. And she received her undergraduate degree from University of Winnipeg. And again, shout out to Manitoba, my Manitoba sister. Hello, Kaitlyn, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I've never been called a legal goddess before. I think I should work that into my bio.
Absolutely, do it now.
Okay.
You should accept nothing less than legal goddess.
Yeah. Love it.
Well, Kaitlyn, I know we've been running you ragged, and so I really appreciate you being here and combing your hair and washing your face for it. I mean,
yeah,
we don't have a lot of
pleasure.
time these days to do things like
Yeah,
that.
gotta do it sometimes.
So Kaitlyn, a lot of folks have not heard of S5 yet. This is a really kind of big moment. So can you tell us about the bill and what it could mean for animals in laboratories in Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe I'll just back it up. So
yeah, please.
So what Bill S5 is it's a bill that amends the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. So it's an environmental law, it's not an animal law. So it may not be intuitive why Animal Justice is investing so much in this bill. But Bill S5, because it amends CEPA, it's really important. It's really important for animals. It's really important for the environment. It's also really important for human health, because the bill is huge. And so when I used to be an environmental lawyer, I've worked with many parts of the bill, but the part that most people think about and that I've certainly done the most work on is part 5, and that's the part that talks about new chemical substances, and then also chemical substances that are already used in Canada. So basically what it is, it's the law that governs how we assess new chemicals that are coming into Canada or being imported into Canada, and also existing substances. When there's evidence to suggest that a chemical is harmful, that's kind of where CEPA kicks in, and it's supposed to be the tool by which we make sure that these substances are not going to harm the environment, and they're not going to harm human health either. So testing chemicals is incredibly important. We have to make sure they're safe, but the question is, how do we do that? And at present, we do a lot of it by testing on animals. And so what we're really focusing in on, for the most part, is, how can we get CEPA? This is a law that's like 20 years old at this point, so it's pretty out of date. I think everyone agrees it's out of date. It's in need of very significant overhaul. This overhaul has been in the works for years. I was working on it before my last child was born, and she's now 4. So it's been going on for a long time. But the question is, okay, how can we make the bill a really strong bill that protects the environment, protects human health, but also doesn't inadvertently result in a whole bunch of new testing on animals to make sure these products are safe? So, it's an important question. It's a challenging question, to be honest, but in some ways, the good news is Canada's really lagged behind on this front. In the EU, they already have legislative commitments and mechanisms to phase out toxicity testing on animals. In the US, they've made a commitment to eliminating toxicity testing by 2035. So, the good thing about being behind the crowd is that you can look and see what other countries have done and learn from that. And so that's really what we're hoping is going to happen here.
I love how you reframed it, instead of we are the laggards and,
Well,
we're losers. We are,
yeah.
but at least we have this advantage now to do it right when we do it.
Yeah. And like we're laggards when it comes to the law, but like there are a lot of scientists in Canada who are already working on this. I mean, I think you've had Charu on before from the CCAM at the University of Windsor. So we've got folks like Charu. We've also got scientists in government. So like there is a lot of work that's being done, but what we want to see is, let's put these requirements into the law so that even if we have a change in political will, even if we have other challenges in the future, that we make sure that we actually stay on track and we meet this 2035 goal that the Liberal Party of Canada announced in the last election. Let's make sure we meet it, and in order to do that, I think we need some strong legal tools.
Yeah, so I mean, this was actually a campaign promise from the Liberals in this last election, where suddenly all of the parties had animal protection platforms, but we do know that they're dragging their feet on a few of those promises already. Does this bill have more hope because it isn't just a lone animal protection bill?
I think so. I mean, the wheels are already in motion, right? This is a bill that's already being amended. And I think, when we started working on this at Animal Justice, in some ways for me, the question is, are we too late? Because the bill's already in motion, it's already being strengthened. And there's a lot of other really exciting stuff, like the right to healthy environments going in there. There's a lot of really exciting stuff going on with this bill. And so the question was, well, can we also get, animal testing on the table? Mm-hmm. So fortunately we have, because, when the bill was first introduced, there was a mention to the goal, but there weren't really any tools to actually make sure we get there.
How do you think that mention got in? Like any clue how that mention got in, even to start with? Like, is that just from general lobbying over the years, or do you think there's somebody in particular behind it?
Well, I mean, so we had been asking for animal testing to be in there, so I don't. I like to think that we had a role there, but I know that there are some folks in the minister's office, or there were, who were also aware of this issue. Certainly there's, folks in the department at Environment Canada and at Health Canada who do understand the need to move away from animal testing. So, I think we have some champions on the inside here and there. And then, as I said, we ourselves and a coalition of other groups have also been speaking with staff and with elected officials and trying to get this on the radar. So I think when it was introduced, it was at least on the radar, and I was really happy about that. But now the question is, can we do more? And I think we can. And the good news is the Senate also made some amendments now, so it's definitely stronger. But it's not strong enough for me, so we want to keep on pushing.
So the work here is not just to get it passed; it's to get amendments to it, amendments to the current form.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, we certainly don't want to see what the Senate did watered down in any way. So, what we really want is that we want MPs of all parties to understand, what the Senate did, and that it's a good thing, and that Canadians want to see it. And the interesting thing too is that it's not just Canadians that want to see it, and it's not just animal groups that want to see it. Actually, industry tends to be supportive of this stuff too, which I think it helps. It helps when you're talking to folks from various political parties. So what we need is MPs to understand that, let's not touch that, let's not backtrack, but there might be a few ways still that we could tweak it to make it more effective.
So, Kaitlyn, I want to hear more about some brass tacks about how this bill, the journey of it so far. But first, I want people to really emotionally connect to what this bill is about. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what the situation for animals being used for testing right now is, especially those involved in toxicity tests?
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things, unless you're working on it, you might not have ever heard the phrase toxicity testing. But what we're really talking about when we talk about toxicity testing is, it's also known as safety assessment. So, it's experiments and research that are aimed at determining the degree to which a chemical negatively impacts an organism. So, we can look at things like the duration of exposure to a specific chemical, the route of exposure, is a human or animal inhaling it? Are they ingesting it? And also the concentration of the substance. So, we do this for a very valid reason, because we want to make sure that when we're putting, a chemical in your products that you're going to be using at home, or chemicals that's going to be used in the refinement process at the industrial scale, we want to make sure that it's not going to have a harmful effect on the environment. But unfortunately, what we know is that toxicity testing is the most harmful type of animal use in Canadian science. And that's because many of the tests fall in the most severe category of harm that animals can experience. So we're looking at pain that's at the threshold of an anesthetized animal. And these experiments, it varies from year to year, but they can impact approximately 90,000 animals a year in Canada. So, the numbers are huge, and the suffering is huge too. It's and I'm not a scientist. And so, when I conceive of it, why are these tests so harmful? Really what it is it's a test to say, if this is on your skin, is it going to harm your skin? If you put it in your body, is it going to make you sick? Mm-hmm. So the test can involve things like forced ingestion, followed by vomiting, forced inhalation, which causes throat and lung irritation and burning to animals who are restrained in inhalation chambers. There's also skin and eye irritation, which can also cause significant pain and itchy sores and rashes. So, we're talking about some experiments that cause really serious suffering. So I think
and eventually death.
And eventually death.
Yeah.
Yeah. And once the experiment is done, the animals are going to be generally killed if they aren't killed as a result of the experiment. So if there's a way we can do this and get this information without testing on animals, I think we have a moral obligation, certainly, but now we want to see a legal obligation too, to move away from that.
Yeah, for a lot of us here, we're animal advocates, and we're always trying to find the most effective way to help animals. A lot of our attention goes to farmed animals, which makes total sense because of the numbers and the degree of suffering. But there is something so haunting of thinking about these animals who never know anything but being in a metal cage, isolated, alone, and just constantly being tortured, like in the worst way possible. Like there is something that just feels so barbaric about that. And it really does call for us to pay attention to this and to give it our time and energy.
Yeah. Yeah, and from the numbers perspective too, of course, it pales in comparison to farmed animals that are used in Canada, but 90,000 animals, that's a lot of animals each year. Mm-hmm. So, it is still very serious. And, as you say, like the level of suffering is hard to really imagine.
Yeah. And 90,000 is the amount of animals that are have to go through the toxicity test. Is that right, Kaitlyn?
Yeah.
I don't know what the number is for overall animals being experimented on in Canada. Do you know that?
I do. I was going to say over 5 million, but I actually, before I joined this, I saw a note saying that the most recent numbers were out, and I think it's more like 3.5 million for last year. So, still a lot of animals used in science. And then again, when you look at those 3.5 million on the whole, toxicity testing is going to be the most harmful use that they can be put to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned here we are like in this nightmare scenario, creating this nightmare scenario for animals. And yet there are alternatives coming up fast and furious. And I know you're not a scientist, Kaitlyn, but can you tell us a little bit about the alternatives to animal testing that are coming out, and what are some of the advantages of those?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really exciting. And, not being a scientist, I'm sure I don't understand all of the nuance involved, but it is certainly an area of science that's developing rapidly, and it has a lot of promise. So, there's a whole range of non-animal methods that can be used, but one that I find really exciting is this method approach called organ on a chip. And so as I understand that, and if Charu was here, she could actually show you the little chip as she's done before in meetings that I've been at.
And also, Kaitlyn, we have a module in Animal Justice Academy where she actually does that. So Kirsten is
awesome.
going to pop that in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is where human-derived cells and tissues are used to create functional units of key human organs. You can have things like lungs on a chip that can be used for toxicity testing and drug development. So it's actually like a human functional organ effectively on a tiny chip that can be used. There's also 3D bioprinting, which uses substances containing human cells in order to 3D print functional human tissues. There's in vitro assays, which allow for rapid screening of thousands of chemicals and compounds. There's a whole range of new technology that's being developed in Canada and around the world. And so, we're not at a place right now, unfortunately, where all toxicity testing can be done without animals. I recognize that, but I think we're moving quickly in the direction of non-animal methods. And, I think that what we need is funding and laws to move us there faster. And the good news is that not only do these tests help animals, they spare thousands of animal lives and suffering, they can actually be more effective in many ways at predicting environmental outcomes, and even predicting adverse outcomes in humans, because we're using human cells. We're not looking at what happens in a mouse or a guinea pig. We can actually use these things to look at what would this do to a human's organs. So it's more protective for humans, it's more protective for the environment, and it can also be a lot quicker and a lot less expensive. So there's a lot of reasons that this is, I think, the future of, well, I hope it's the future of all science, certainly toxicity testing. And as I said, other governments have recognized that. Now we see the Canadian government recognizing that. And so I think it is really exciting. And it really can't happen fast enough.
Yeah, I mean, the inefficacy of animal testing is just unbelievable. And so, it's been hard to believe that this hasn't been a push by government sooner. But one of the things, I think it was Charlie that said a while ago that, one of the biggest allies in this is actually the pharmaceutical companies, because they're realizing how much cheaper this is and how much, faster they're getting products out because of it.
Yeah, that's for sure. As I said, it's the camp of stakeholders that's supportive is pretty big. And so that's, I think that's part of the reason that we've seen so much success so far, not just in Canada, but also in the US. And if we can do this faster and we can do it in a way that actually predicts these adverse outcomes better, then I think everyone agrees that that's what we should be doing.
And if we have legislation that is mandating that we move towards this, the only thing that's been missing is the money, right? Yeah. The money to do the development. So this bill, can you explain a little bit more why this particular bill with the amendments we're proposing could really light a fire under this initiative of alternative testing methods?
Yeah, so we proposed a number of amendments, all trying to get at that outcome, but in various ways. And so, the interesting thing about the legislative process is, when at the very, very beginning, before any bill was introduced, I had some ideas about how best to do this, right? Yes, new section or a couple of provisions in SEPA, it would focus in on this issue. But once a bill is introduced, you kind of have to work with the sections that are in the bill. So not all of SEPA was on the table, all this to say. So we kind of had to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, well, what sections have been included in the bill? And what can we do to tweak those sections in order to get at this objective? So we've had to be a bit creative, but I think we've done a good job. And so basically what we've tried to do is to say, on the one hand, we need to spell out clearly that testing on animals has to be a last resort, and that takes immediate effect. You just can't do it unless there's no other option. That's what we were hoping for, at least, although the wording is not quite that strong in the bill at present. But anyway, that's a whole side issue. And then second, what we wanted to do is, again, looking to the US, who's a little bit further ahead, one of the tools that's been really powerful there has been mandatory planning in order to actually get there. This is not something we should be doing in a piecemeal way. We need to actually sit back and say, what needs to happen in order to get us to this 2035 goal and make sure that we're on track. And so there's the planning piece, and then there's the reporting piece. And so in the US, there's, you know, a reporting mechanism, and it's public, and it ensures a level of accountability. And so that's something that we did too through amendments, was say, because there is a reporting mechanism in SEPA. And so what we've done, and what the Senate agreed to do, was to add in there a piece on toxicity testing. So, you know, annually the minister is reporting to Parliament on progress toward phasing out animal testing. And so, you know, while I understand reporting and planning, it doesn't sound sexy, it doesn't sound that exciting, it actually is. It's really important. And so that, I think, is also one of the really strong pieces in there. And it's one that we're really excited about, because, you know, again, you know, we're trying to look at future proofing the law, essentially, no matter what. If there's a change in government in the future, if there's a change in political will, at least there's this mechanism to make sure that we're on track.
So, okay, so let's take it back a little bit, just so that we know where we're at right now, and where we need to go. And folks that are here joining us, just so you know, I will be taking questions for Kaitlyn. I see a couple of our already. Just make sure you put *** Q or question, and just so I can differentiate it from the rest. So Kaitlyn, let's take the journey of the bill kind of from the beginning to where it is right now, and give us a little bit of behind the scenes.
Sure. So the bill was actually introduced in the last Parliament, and then there were some elections. So, you know, all the bills that were before that Parliament died, as they say. So it was reintroduced. But the interesting thing is, it was actually reintroduced in the Senate, which is not a process that I've actually seen before, you know, in my past law reform work. So it was interesting. It caused us to have to, you know, take a step back and think, you know, what does that mean? Who should we be reaching out to? So it started in the Senate. And
Kaitlyn, can I interrupt for a second? When bills start in the Senate, it's often because there's a champion in the Senate around this, right? And they feel like the Parliament isn't moving fast enough. So is that their way of kickstarting it?
Well, usually that's how things happen in the Senate. And, you know, if we talk about like the whale and dolphin captivity bill, for instance, it was because a senator introduced it. This was actually a government bill. So it was actually the government themselves saying, we're going to introduce this bill, but and I think mostly, as I understand it, it was to move things a little faster. So they said, you know, there's other stuff basically that the House of Commons committee is dealing with right now. So let's start it in the Senate. We'll get the process moving there, and then we'll go to the House of Commons. So, and, you know, and I understand probably not everyone here is in Canada, but the difference, our Senate's a little different than the US Senate. It's not elected officials. It's just a different body. But anyway, I don't think that matters for our purposes. But basically, it was introduced in the Senate, went to the Environment Committee there, and that committee introduced amendments, a lot of amendments, as it turns out, several of which were consistent with what we were asking for in terms of phasing out toxicity testing. So we're really pleased. I think the Senate seemed to get the issue. They seemed to get behind the issue. And even, you know, some of our amendments that weren't successful, you know, no one really was debating the issue. You know, no senator was up there saying this isn't important, or, you know, we don't want strong legal tools. It was just more of, you know, differing opinions about how to do that. So it's good. I think it's really promising. The Senate made amendments, and now it's gone to Parliament. And so it's, you know, basically going to be sent to the Standing Committee on Environment there soon. The last I heard was around Halloween, so that's like now. So, you know, really any day it'll go to the Standing Committee on Environment. It's hard to know how long that's going to take. On the one hand, we want to see it move quickly. On the other hand, you know, we want to see it done well. So, you know, it will take some time, obviously. And they'll review the bill. They'll look at what the Senate did, and then they'll think about what they need to do further, whether there's more amendments. And so, as we said at the beginning, at least we want the House of Commons committee to look at it and say, you know what the Senate did makes sense about animal testing. We like these stronger provisions, but in an ideal world, we'll see them maybe tweak it a little bit and make it even stronger.
And how often would that be the case, that, you know, there's amendments made in the Senate? I mean, I know this is an unusual case, just even the way the order it's going in, but how likely is it that Parliament, the House committee, might recommend further amendments?
I think they're going to do it. At first, I think that was not the plan. I think that the hope was, it'd go through the Senate, it would go, and then all, the amendments necessary would be done there, and then it would go to the House of Commons, and then it would be done. That would be faster. I think the government's a bit surprised by some of the amendments the Senate made, not animal testing ones really. But the Senate, they can kind of do their own thing in many ways. And so I think there's a few amendments that the government's going to want to make, all this to say. And most of it, as I said, I don't feel like toxicity testing has come out as some controversial issue. But there are other controversial issues. I kind of alluded to the human right to a healthy environment that's in there. That's really important. I used to work on that issue. It's also proved quite controversial in terms of how to do that. So I suspect there's still going to be a lot of dialogue around those issues. And also part 6, which we might talk about later, that has to do with genetically modified organisms. That's come out as another pretty controversial topic. So I think it's pretty likely we'll see some amendments.
So let's talk about the special role that we're hoping AJAers will play in all of this, because people are already starting to ask, what do we do? How do we do this? How do we help?
Yeah, well, I think, at a really high level, what we need is for parliamentarians to understand Bill S5 is important. I don't think anyone's really debating that. It's an environmental bill. It's really important for a number of reasons. So, they need to understand that Canadians do want to see this law improved, but that part of that involves phasing out toxicity testing on animals because, as I said, this is an environmental bill. It's a huge environmental bill. There's so much in there. Every time I look at it, I've forgotten parts of it because it really deals with a number of issues. So I think when most members of Parliament hear about CEPA, Canadian Environmental Protection Act, they're not thinking about toxicity testing on animals, right? It's not intuitive that that's an issue. And so I think for me, that's really the key, is making sure that elected officials understand that, yes, this is an important environmental bill, but we need to do it in a way that also phases out toxicity testing on animals.
So what we are hoping to do is we would like every AJA possible to do a meeting with their MP to educate them on this bill and to ask for further amendments, or show why the amendments that have been added are important and suggest further amendments. And I know that we've had a lot of power in the past with MP meetings with AJAers. The Ag Bill, federal Ag Bill for one, folks, and you did such a great job in helping turn that around. And so we're hoping that we can get you to make a difference in this way. So, and so for anybody that right away is going, oh God, I'm really, I don't know if I can do this and all that sort of thing. I think, it's important to be able to say, Kaitlyn, for those that are thinking one meeting won't make a difference, I can sit this one out. What can you say to that?
Well, hearing from constituents is important. When I have meetings on behalf of Animal Justice, I feel like they go better when the person I'm meeting with says, oh yeah, I've heard from some constituents on this issue. So it does make a difference. And I get that it's a bit of a technical topic. Like, I'm not even a scientist. Like, obviously I've kind of been embedded in this for a while, so I understand the issues. But your MP is not going to be a scientist, right? And your MP is probably never going to have thought about this issue before. So I would expect they aren't going to want you to get into a huge level of scientific detail, right? So I think that in that way, even though it's kind of a technical topic, hopefully it's accessible and we can help to make it accessible. And, when you look at things like the federal Ag, yeah, you did a great job on that issue. And that was even harder in some ways because, we were going against the momentum. Like, here was this bill that was introduced and we were trying to stop it. But here the momentum is really on our side, right? This bill's put forward. Toxicity testing's on the table. We just want to make sure it stays there and that maybe some improvements are made.
Okay, so let's talk about, so first of all, we have prepared a very detailed AJA action brief, which Kirsten put in the chat, and it will give you, every step of the way, including even just how to find out who your MP is, but it'll also give you an overview, it'll give you some talking points, Kaitlyn, if we could kind of go over some of the main things that we're hoping that, AJAers can educate their MPs on and ask for. Can you give us just a little overview?
Yeah, for sure. I think so. I don't even know if it's in the brief, but for me, the first one is, hey, this bill's coming. The Senate made some really strong progress, and you should support it because this is important. So I think that that's like a really high level point. But we have some more specific amendments in there that we're hoping to make, and one of them has to do with section 68.1 of the act. You don't have to memorize the provision there, but basically what we want, that's a section that talks about when the minister can engage in testing on animals. And there was some discussion at the Senate about, when is it okay to still test on animals? And the language that was adopted was reasonably possible. So the minister can't do this unless it's not reasonably possible to do it by other ways. And our concern with that is that it's pretty vague. What is reasonably possible? Does it mean like nothing was available that day? Does it mean like it was a little bit harder? So we thought, well, how can we rein that in a bit more? Because that's originally what we said was shouldn't happen unless there's no scientifically justified way to do that. So that's one area we're really, and it's set out in the brief, so I don't expect you to like remember me saying the subsections, but basically let's think of some stronger language there that goes a bit beyond the word reasonably possible and tries to constrain it a little bit more.
And this is all laid out for you. And Kaitlyn, just to interrupt for a second, like you can, because it's more technical and there's some specific wording, you don't have to be afraid to take in a piece of paper to refer to. People aren't going to expect it to roll off your tongue. I mean, the first part, you want to be able to go in and show some emotion and show why this is important and important to you, important to society, important to science, important to animals. But when you get into the nitty gritty, it's okay to refer. You don't need to have this all memorized.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that really makes good sense. So that's one of our asks is let's strengthen that specific section a bit. The second one is like, it's an interesting one. So, when we were originally thinking about like what language do we want to see in there, all of the language that we were proposing was focusing on reducing and replacing animals. But some of you may know there's in animal testing, there's kind of the 3 R's. The third R is refinement. So usually you talk about refining, reducing, and replacing. But we really just focus in on reducing and replacing here because we wanted to make sure that we are not tinkering with husbandry practices, putting the mice in a larger cage or doing stuff like that. We want to actually get rid of the mice, or the guinea pig as the case may be, or the fish as the case may be. And so when the Senate made their amendments, they added the word refine in. And I think that was done, probably with good intentions. Refinement can be important. It means using a smaller number of animals maybe, or improving the way they're being treated or housed a bit. That's important. But again, what we really want is the focus to be reduce and replace here. And so, we've originally, we said, get the word out altogether. Let's just make this about reducing and replacing. And as things happen, as some of you might know from, speaking with government representatives in the past, there's sort of a level of, accommodation, playing
all sides. Yeah.
So we've spoken, we understand that they're pretty set on keeping refinement in there. And that's okay. Like, as I said, sometimes that can be beneficial. So, we don't want to close the door completely, but what we've said is, okay, at least let's take it out of the purposes of the act. Like, let's make the purpose here really about replacing and reducing. And then that way, when we have those reports that are coming every year, the focus is on that. And so that's kind of the second ask that we've said is, at least when we're talking about like the overarching purposes of the act, let's just focus on replacing and, ultimately eliminating.
Okay, so that's some of the amendments that we'd like to see. Anything else that you want to mention?
Yeah, the third one is an interesting one. So yeah, so when we originally were talking about amendments, we wanted this bill, as I think all animal testing laws should be at this point in time, to not just capture vertebrate animals, but to also capture some invertebrates, like, you know, octopuses, for instance. Invertebrate animals that we know to be sentient, they can experience pain and suffering, and so they deserve protection too. But what I should say is that right now, as I understand it, all toxicity testing, or most of it, almost all of it, is done on vertebrate animals. There's no toxicity testing on, say, octopuses right now. So that's the good news. But we thought, well, this is also kind of our first federal law aimed at animal testing. So part of my concern as a lawyer is also that I don't want to see the language of vertebrate used here and then picked up and used in future animal testing laws. I think we should just be creating an inclusive language that applies to all sentient animals at this point. So all this to say, originally what we wanted was a definition of animal that included not just vertebrates, some invertebrates too. But we didn't see that. The Senate kept it at vertebrates. And so, again, we've had to go back to the drawing board a bit and think, okay, what do we do with this? Do we continue to say that we need a definition of animal that's, more broad? I don't think we are going to win that argument at this point. I think that would involve too many amendments, which is, disappointing, but it is what it is. And so what we've said is, okay, at least let's say that if it turns out to be necessary in the future, at least the government can pass some regulations to protect invertebrate animals. And from our discussion so far, it sounds like elected officials and staff, they think that sounds okay. It wouldn't change things now. But we know, for instance, we've seen in the US a lot of controversy around the use of animals like octopuses in science because the laws don't protect them at present, and they are being used for various forms of research, but again, not yet toxicity testing, and hopefully it stays that way. So the third ask that we're asking for is, let's at least have a tool in there so that if we need to expand this to protect some invertebrate animals, we can do that. We don't want to like, it's also a bit of a controversial one because when we originally had the conversation, folks in government said, well, we can't protect all invertebrates because a lot of this testing happens on simpler life forms like zooplankton, and that's just going to be a non-starter. If we're saying that can't happen at all, that shuts down like water quality testing in the north, and so we did clearly try to make a constrained definition that just caught some of the invertebrates that we know to be sentient. But again, you don't need to know all that level of detail to talk to your MP. The key is just we want to make sure that have you seen The Octopus or My Octopus Teacher?
Yes,
that's a good way to introduce the conversation, I think, because a lot of senators and MPs have. So if you've seen that movie, you get it. So our point is just, let's just have a tool in there to make sure that if we need to protect animals like the octopus in the future, that we can do that.
Amazing. So Kaitlyn, there is so much detail that one could get into, and it feels a little overwhelming. If somebody is here, in the group today and thinking, "Oh my God, I can't hold more than two thoughts in my brain," what are the main points you think are really important to hit home in that MP meeting? Like, for example, you could do a one sheet with a lot of the details. Taking them from our brief, change it up a little bit so it's a little bit different, but just the general gist, and go in there. And what are the couple of things that they could say that would be very important and influential with an MP?
Yeah, so I think, as you said, I think the overarching point is why this is serious. This is really, really painful stuff, and science is evolving, so we don't need to do it anymore. So I think for me, that's the one point that, if an elected official understands that, then they will be more inclined to get behind amendments. And I think also this is something that's happening elsewhere, right? In the US and the EU. So, Canada's not doing some, crazy new thing that's going to jeopardize science. We're really just following the pack and following what makes really good sense. So I think what we want an MP to take away is to understand that what we're trying to do here is say, let's not do this unless it's an absolute last resort. And let's make sure we're moving in a direction toward eliminating it completely. And you can say, especially if you're talking to a Liberal MP, the Liberal Party of Canada is committed to doing this. So we are trying to make sure that you fulfill those commitments.
Amazing. Okay, perfect. So very simple, folks. Those were like 2 or 3 points that Kaitlyn put forward. And at the end of the day, that those can be your talking points, and the details can again be in that one pager. And remember, for anybody who isn't comfortable with meeting with their MP yet, we have a couple of modules in Animal Justice Academy. Gabriel Wilgen's module in week 3. I think Kirsten's got a link for that. We also did lunchtime live with him, like a whole hour-long workshop on it. So you can look that up as well. So that'll take you through every sort of like little piece of contacting your MP, what to leave with them, which is a 1 page basically of what you want them to know, and just doing a follow-up with them within the next week to see, just to follow up and confirm what was discussed. And then if they make some sort of commitment, following up yet again. So that's the general gist of it. The other thing that I want to remind folks of is if you are going to do the action, like Janet just said, just emailed Filomeno Tasso. So yeah, we're not even done the lunchtime live and Janet's taken action. I love it, Janet. So, for example, you just email and you can just say, the bill S5 is a part of SEPA. I want to talk about toxicity testing. That's really, Kaitlyn, anything else that they would want to put in that initial email or phone call?
No, I think that's it. Yeah. And, again, like because again, I understand that it's kind of a daunting topic in some ways, but like the MPs that are actually going to be the ones introducing amendments, those are going to be the ones on the Environment Committee. So and maybe there are some folks here whose MPs are on the Environment Committee. I can put that link in the chat. But if your MP is not on the Environment Committee, they probably don't even need to get into the detail about, what should section 68.1 say, what should section 114 say. They just want to understand the issue, and they want to be able to talk to their colleagues about it and say, hey, are we doing something here? Let's push a little further. Let's meet this goal. We think it's important. My constituents think it's important.
Yeah, excellent. And really that's the big ask, right? Is that to talk to your colleagues, just to bring attention to this. If you know anybody on the committee, to really especially talk to them. And when the bill happens, make sure you're voting for the bill, and make sure those amendments are in. Do whatever you can around that. Okay, so and the other thing, Dee Dee brought this up, and so I just want to address this. One of the other things we always suggest in AJA is if you're really nervous about doing the meeting by yourself. First of all, if you're planning on reaching out to do a meeting, please email us at academy@animaljustice.ca. Kirsten will put that in the comments. And also, this is all in your morning email. The email I sent out this morning, folks, that's all of this is in it. And I'm also going to be putting all this info in the Facebook, or it already is in the Facebook group. So please take a look at that. But if we know who your MP is, what riding you're in, if other people get in touch with us that are in the same riding, saying I'd love to have a pair up, then we'll do our best to do that. Okay, so please, we can do that, some matchmaking if you email us, or again if you comment in the Facebook group under the post as well. Okay, so Kaitlyn, lots of questions here. Let's do some
I can see them all popping in.
Yeah, so let me see here. I want to ask here about, a great question from Ina. She's saying, would you recommend we speak to animal rights on this, or try to speak to the environment part because it's an amendment to an Environment Act?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think focusing on the environment part of a bit is good, because we don't. And like in the US, as I understand, actually, there was some friction between environmental groups and animal groups on this topic. So we don't want to be seen as proposing something that's going to, decrease protection for the environment. So I think mentioning that this supports the environmental objectives of the Act is important. But the thing is about animal testing is this actually an issue that, as I can see, crosses political lines in many ways. So I do think that, we're not talking about an Animal Rights Act, but what we're talking about is reducing the unnecessary use of animals in science, and some pretty horrific suffering. And so I do think that talking about that is helpful too, because this is just one of those issues when you poll Canadians, or even when you talk to folks in various political parties, it seems like generally people get behind it. It's not controversial like farmed animal issues. I mean, it is controversial. I don't mean to downplay it, but it's less. It's I think that focusing on both pieces, that you can save animal lives and reduce suffering and protect the environment. It's a win-win.
Absolutely. So yeah, so Ina, speak from your heart. I mean, these are some of the most horrific things we do to animals in society. There's not many people who are not going to relate to that. Okay, but it's great advice from Kaitlyn that we can still work in the environmental mandate as well. Okay, we have from Tenebrae asking, do ag gag laws prevent activists from revealing toxicity tests to the public?
That's an interesting question, and I haven't really thought much about it, but the answer would be yes in Alberta. That would be the shortest answer. So Ontario's ag-gag law prohibits, in a sense, prohibits undercover exposés, but it focuses on farmed animals. So it just applies to like slaughterhouses, farms, rodeos, horse races, all that stuff. But Alberta's is broader. Alberta is actually just it prohibits entry under false pretenses into any property. So that would capture things like labs and also, puppy mills, for instance.
Okay. Thank you, Kaitlyn. Marvin is asking if this applies to cosmetic testing.
Yeah, so it's different. There are some areas of overlap, as I understand it. So toxicity testing looks at the chemical. So if you're going to use this chemical in Canada for whatever reason, that this is the law that targets that. It doesn't look at chemical products. So it wouldn't be like, is this lipstick safe? So it's different, all this to say. And I think that we'll hopefully see some movement on the cosmetic testing side soon as well. But as I said, there's some overlap because there are chemicals in personal care products, and those would be captured here as well to an extent. So there's overlap, but it's separate.
Excellent, Kaitlyn. Now you mentioned that the timing is sort of up in the air because it's such a huge bill, but so it could move slowly or it could move very quickly. So as far as the timing of getting a meeting with the MP, we probably need to get on it as fast as possible. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say the sooner the better. I would, yeah, what I should have looked at what the schedule is, like when does Parliament break for Christmas, for instance. I just don't know that offhand. I think if you can meet in November, that would be great. I'm not sure if they'll carry into January or not. It's hard to say. So yeah, I would say target a November meeting if you can. But just do your best at this point. I hope that this becomes law in 2023. I forgot the year there for a second.
Yeah.
I was like, is it 2024 next year? Anyway, I hope it becomes law in 2023. But beyond that, yeah, it's hard to predict the timing. But I think if you can squeeze in a meeting with your MP while they're in your respective town at some point or city in November, or maybe early December, that would be great.
Yeah. Like being able to get your MPs when they're off, out of the House of Commons is the best way to go. So, so John had been asked, when will they be voting on the bill again? So we don't know, John, but one of the other things I guess to consider is the committee is going to be going through the bill bit by bit and probably wanting to close the book on certain sections. So the sooner that we do this, the more, chance that they'll have this information and some of their, pressure from their MPs as they're looking at this section.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. CJ is saying my MP is Anita Anand, who is really busy as defense minister. I want text. Wants to have text that can be sent if I cannot get a meeting. The brief above is not text to send to politicians. Can we please have a few clear points to make to our request? Okay, so I would really, CJ, just go in and get, whatever you would put on a one sheet, you put in your email to Ms. Anand. However, correct me if I'm wrong, Kaitlyn, I would suggest that you really try to get a meeting with one of her assistants, with one of her staff. Kaitlyn
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, of course, that makes good sense that she's going to be particularly busy. But the more, like, even ministers of defense, the more that they're hearing from their constituents on an issue, she's not going to like take this on. She's not going to make it her project. She's obviously busy with other things, but in conversations with her colleagues, perhaps at least she can mention that this is something she's supportive of, or when it comes time to vote on it, at least she understands what she's doing and why it's important, and not just the environmental piece. So yeah, so I think that reaching out, and as you said, putting the text in an email or meeting with her staff, that can be really effective too.
Excellent. A couple of, Kaitlyn, is it okay if we answer a couple more questions? I know we're at 1 p.m.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. So a couple of concerns. Tenebrae is saying 2035 is pretty lagging and losing. And that does feel like a long way away, but can you tell us a little bit about why we shouldn't feel so discouraged by that date?
Yeah, I mean, push for an earlier date. I would I originally, I think in our earlier advocacy, I think I can't even remember, I kind of picked a date. I think I said 2030. And it's the Netherlands, I think, that's committed to eliminating most forms of animal testing, including toxicity testing, by 2025. I don't know if they're on track to meet that goal or not. But yeah, I mean, push for an earlier date, right? The Liberal Party has so far committed to 2035. But that's not going to go in the act. That's kind of separate. So there's no reason that we can't try to push that date up for sure. And some of the mechanisms that we created, I hope leave some room for that. The annual reporting. Something I didn't mention is we've also suggested that they establish an advisory committee. Once the act passes, establish an advisory committee to come up with a plan, basically. And that doesn't require any amendments to the act. The tool's already there to create an advisory committee. So this is kind of a separate ask, but that's part of it too. If that advisory party or committee looked at the issue and said, you know what, I think we can do better. I think we should go for 2030 or 2029 or whatever date we want to pick, then that would be great too. So yeah, I mean, unfortunately, if we push for an immediate end, I don't think we're going to win that battle. So we need to be strategic about what we're asking for, but I agree, 2035 is a long way away. That's a lot of animals. I'd like to see it move faster too.
Mm-hmm. And 2035 is the cutoff. There has to be tons of movement to be able to reach that. So
yeah, and in the US, they set an interim target of reducing requests and funding by 30% by a specific year. And it's funny, now I can't even remember what the year is, but it's something earlier, like 2025 or 2028. So they kind of do have targets along the way. And I think if we're going to meet ours, we need to have some targets along the way too. So hopefully we'll see that.
Fireweed is asking best NGOs to donate financial support for this work. Where are donations best directed to advance this work? Animal Justice.
Yeah.
I'll be the first one to say it. I mean, we really have been working very hard on this from the beginning. So yeah, I mean, we basically Kaitlyn has been run off her feet with this, and we have been sort of leading this organization of various groups. Kaitlyn, any other organizations that you would suggest?
Yeah, I mean, I'll always suggest donating to Charu at the Canadian Center for Alternatives to Animal Methods at the University of Windsor. She's doing amazing work. There's no way that we're gonna reach this goal of phasing out toxicity testing on Canada unless scientists like Charu have the resources they need to develop the science. So yeah, I will always say to donate to the CCAM at the University of Windsor. But
and Kirsten's going to put that link in there. I'm sure she's got it. Sorry, and Animal Justice. Yes, you said.
Yeah, as I said, like we are doing like a lot of work on this. It's definitely taking up significant organizational resources. So the more we can do, the better, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And Charu, we're a big friend of Charu and what she's doing, and we will always be there. There's the donation button for Kirsten. We will always be supporting Charu. She's one of our instructors here in AJA and a great friend. All right, just a couple of quick other things. Laura said, in case people ask while I'm educating others, what specific animals are used in Canada for toxicity testing? Really great question.
Yeah, it varies, and we did come up with a list of the most common ones, and now I don't have the list in front of me, but fish, and I think birds, but then rats and mice and rabbits and guinea pigs. So kind of the I don't know, standard, like that sounds like a kind of cold way to put it, but the types of animals that are used most, not as far as I understand, like not primates, for instance, and I mentioned not octopuses or anything like that at this point, but yeah, some of those animals that unfortunately we know are commonly tested on.
And would dogs and cats be at all ever up for toxicity testing?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't actually know the answer offhand, so I don't want to speculate. I mean, yeah. I would imagine dogs, but and Lori's here, so Lori, chime in the chat because you probably know that more than me from the Beagle Alliance. But yeah, I just don't know offhand. I can't actually remember, unfortunately.
Yeah, dogs, beagles are hugely used is one of the messages we're getting.
Yeah.
So, okay, excellent. And I think Dee Dee was expressing, I'm worried about weak language. It will give leeway to keep using animals. We know that weak animal laws basically are useless. And I think, Kaitlyn, that's what we're trying to do here is to strengthen that language so that there isn't a lot of opportunity to squirm out.
Yeah, that's certainly what we're trying to do.
And I mean, I believe, we're trying to get language that is non-squirmable, but still, can get through. Is that it's a fine balance, right?
Yeah, as I said, so I mean, when it comes to and I could go on about the nitty gritty stuff about the drafting, but going back to the one section I talked about before, section 68.1. So originally we said scientifically justified, like unless it's absolutely not scientifically justified, you just can't use animals. And they said, well, that's too stringent. That's not workable because, sometimes there's, I guess, if there's like a significant threat to the environment, for instance, and they want to move quickly to address that threat or significant threat to human health. We think that this chemical is an endocrine disruptor or whatever, that they want to move quickly. So they said, well, we want to be able to incorporate considerations about timing and cost into there. And so, to an extent, I get that, we don't want to perpetuate threats to the environment, which includes animals. There are animals in the environment who will be harmed. So that's why we were saying, okay, well, maybe we can find some sort of middle ground there between our scientifically justified and your reasonably possible, because reasonably possible is really kind of meaningless, I think, in many ways. It's so vague. So yeah, we're trying to find wording. It's going to be a compromise, which is frustrating, but it's going to be a compromise. And so we're trying to think what's the best compromise that we can get.
Yeah, Suzanne had mentioned about, how easy it is for humans to justify this necessity of using animals. Is there advocacy to remove the possibility to use animals entirely? Or is the advocacy just on tightening the requirements? So in this case, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Kaitlyn, we are trying to tighten requirements and take a bunch of animals out of the toxicity testing. But of course, behind the scenes, we are always advocating for, taking animals out of any form of exploitation.
Yeah, and at this point, this is the first time the federal government is committed to ending it completely too. So we are aiming for that ending goal, and we're being quite transparent about it. And so far it seems that the government's on side, so that's good. I mean, the goal is further out than obviously anybody here would like, further out than I would like. But that's the goal. That's the end goal.
And when you say committed to ending it altogether, is that toxicity testing or animal testing altogether?
Toxicity testing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
well, and soon to be cosmetic testing too, as I understand it. But
absolutely
for this law, we're talking just about toxicity testing.
Okay, excellent. Lori, by the way, said, yes, beagles are used and we have seen inhalation and ingestion testing. And Robin said chinchillas are widely used too. Yeah. Interestingly. Okay, there was one other question that I thought was really great, but you know, of course, I've lost it. Sorry. I guess you know one of last thing I'd love for you to talk about, Kaitlyn, is just um, an opportunity like this doesn't come around very often, does it? As far as legislation for animals, can you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a really exciting opportunity. I mean, and I think it's nice too that it dovetails with these other objectives, right? Protecting human health and protecting the environment. So it really is like a perfect opportunity in many ways because, you know, I think, as I said, we can kind of get everybody on side. Do you want to protect the environment? Do you want to protect human health? So even folks that aren't that into animal issues and even industry, right? These things are more effective. They're more cost effective. So, you know, I really just think that this is such an exciting opportunity. And if because of all that momentum, we can get a strong law here, you know, maybe we can use some of that to then, you know, push for other more controversial laws in the future.
Excellent. And Kaitlyn, one last thing, actually, because it's coming up a lot in different forms, is where do the parties stand on this? Because in the past, any sort of animal protection bill has just been point blank refused by conservatives. So that's really discouraged. Anybody that has a conservative MP doesn't tend to have, you know, be able to go very far with them. Is there any indication of what the parties' different sort of positions are around this?
You know, so far it's been a bit of a struggle to get that. I know where the Liberals stand, but you know, historically the NDP has been supportive on issues involving animal testing, like cosmetic testing. But animal testing is an issue that, you know, when you look at polling, it does, as I said, tend to cross political lines. So conservatives tend to get behind this issue too. So I'm hopeful that we'll see all political parties on side to an extent. You know, whether they want to push for our specific amendments or not remains to be seen. But basically I'll just say we're working at it. So, you know, that's part of the reason that, you know, if you have an MP who's a conservative and you meet with them and you get a sense from that meeting where they and their colleagues are standing, then that's really good information for us to have. It's also just a little challenging now with the conservatives because there's been this shuffle because they have a new leader. So there's, you know, a new environment critic. There are new conservative members of the committee. So I've had to kind of go back and reach out to all of the conservative members of the committee now that they've changed. So, so yeah, the more intel that we can get, the better based on meetings. You know, if you meet with your MP and they say, well, you know, this sounds good, but I'm, you know, I'm worried about how it'll impact industry or whatever, then, you know, that's good to know because then we know what we're up against and we know how to frame our messaging accordingly.
And that is why AJers are our super soldiers, because when you go and meet with your political reps, you often get information that we don't even have, you know, because they're a little bit more relaxed. They're talking to a constituent. So it's really great intel, and we want to know everything. So not only keeping us posted on, you know, if you're reaching out, but also when you get a meeting and what the results of the meeting are going to be really helpful. We really want to know about what your journey is with your MP. All right, well, I know we're over time. Kaitlyn, thank you so much for the extra time. And we're going to have you back in the near future because Kaitlyn is also working on our ag gag case in Ontario, suing the Ontario government over ag gag. It's a huge case that Kaitlyn's also been working on. And so we will have you back to talk about that specifically, Kaitlyn. But we had 60 folks show up here live on Zoom, and we had a bunch more over on the live stream on Facebook. So we've got lots of folks that are ready to meet with their MP. And Kaitlyn, thank you, because I know how hard you've been working on this. And let's give Kaitlyn a great big AJA. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming out. I really appreciate it. It's an important issue, so I'm glad that we have this much support.
Excellent. Kirsten, if you can take us off of Spotlight if you haven't already. I just want to mention, folks, in 2 weeks, our Lunchtime Live is going to be about the reducitarian movement. Advantages, disadvantages. We're going to have somebody on that is really big in this movement. And, you know, let's see if they can change some minds and see, you know, the advantages or, again, disadvantages of this tax in our movement to abolish animals being exploited for food. If you're not already on the email list to get these notices, make sure to sign up for free at animaljusticeacademy.com. Thank you, Kaitlyn. Thank you, everybody, for being here and showing us your beautiful faces and your spirit. Let's get out there and meet with some MPs, okay? Woo! All right, everyone, take care.